In this video, we'll be doing some SER versus ESTAR guided practice. So first off, just want to start. I'm doing this right after I just recorded the SER and ESTAR lecture. And so if you need a refresher, here's everything. We have the SER ones for the conjugations, the ESTAR conjugations right here, and then the uses down here. And I would say one thing is that if you get caught up on the uses, if you can't exactly remember, okay, well, is that for SER versus ESTAR? Just remember the idea that SER is to be in a permanent sense and ESTAR is to be in a temporary sense. So is your origin, is that something that's permanent or is that something that's temporary? Well, it's permanent, of course, so it's got to be SER. So if you need help at any point, just try to think about it logically like that. That tends to help a lot. And one more thing I just want to bring up as well is I forgot to bring this up in the last video, but for location, as I was saying, when we were talking about where something is located, we're going to use ESTAR, but if we're talking about events, it's going to be SER. So that's important to know. Location, the terms, if we're talking about an event, going to be SER, but if we're talking about just where something is located at the current moment, talk about ESTAR, even if that location seems to be something permanent, like the mall is in the town. So yeah. All right, so when we're looking at this SER versus ESTAR guided practice, real quick, what we kind of want to do is first, let's break it down. Let's translate what each of these are going to be. Then let's try to think, are we using SER or ESTAR? And then finally, let's choose our conjugation. Now, these are 15 questions generated by ChatGPT. Thank you, ChatGPT. So let's get started on the first one. ¿Cómo blank tú hoy? So what are they trying to say here? Well, I would say, how are you today? Right, so we got how, como, blank. It's going to be some form of SER versus ESTAR if we're talking about tú, which is you. And it would be how are you? And then finally, hoy means today. Let's take a second to think about this one. Well, if we're talking about someone's condition, we're asking them how they are, right? That would be ¿cómo estás? Oops, my US keyboard's on. Okay. That would be ¿cómo estás? ¿Cómo estás tú hoy? How are you today? Next one, we're looking at Juan y María, blank, hermanos. Say Juan and Maria. Say are siblings. Now, hermanos can either mean brothers or siblings. Depends on whether we're talking about a mixed group or whether we're talking about just guys. In this case, though, we're talking about Juan and Maria. It's obviously going to be a mixed group. So we want to say they are siblings. Now let's think, is them being siblings, is that something that fluctuates all the time, or is it something that's permanent? Well, it's going to be permanent, right? We're talking about their relationship to each other. And so in this case, we're going to use ser. The form of ser we'll be using is son. We're talking about Juan and Maria. And in this case, that's going to be ellos. Because of that, we're going to use Juan y María son hermanos. Next, la conferencia, blank, en la sala 203. So in this case, say the conference is in, sala essentially means room 203. And if you remember what I just said about location with events, that's going to be SER instead of ESTAR. It can be a little bit tricky, but try to remember that. And so if we're talking about the conference, that means it, right? So we'd have to use the he, she, it form. We say la conferencia es en la sala 203. Next, de donde? That means from where, but in English, basically we're going to translate this saying the ustedes form, so you guys. So where are you guys from? So you can see the word order is a little bit different. They say from where are you guys, but in English we say where are you guys from. Just the day going at the beginning versus at the end. Same idea being communicated though. So in this case, I'm going to think, where are you guys from? Well, what's that exactly talking about? That's talking about an origin, right? And so in this case, it's going to have to be ser. We're talking about ustedes. De donde son ustedes? Where you're from will never change. It's not something that fluctuates. It's not something that's temporary. Never going to change. So because of that, we're going to be using ser. Next one, los estudiantes blank, muy cansados después del examen. In this case, it's going to be the students, los estudiantes. are muy, very. Cansado or cansados means tired. Después, it's a word that I see forgotten all the time by students. It means essentially like after the and finally exam. It's going to mean after, afterwards. Usually if we're following it up with something else, though, it's going to be after. If we're not following it up with something else, it's going to be afterwards. Oops, students. Okay. So, in this case, if we're talking about them being tired after the exam, let's think real quick. Is them being tired, is that a permanent thing? No, right? That's a condition they're in. And that'll change soon. So because of that, we're going to be saying están. Next one, mi coche, blank, rojo. Mi coche means my car. I hear carro more. Kind of depends on where you are, though, but either one. My car is, and finally, rojo, color red. So let's think, is the car switching colors a lot? No, right? It's not a temporary thing. Because of that, we're going to say es rojo, referring to ser, right? My car is red. Ser in the it form. It's a description, permanent description in this case. Going to be using ser. Next one, la pizza, blank, caliente. Now, pizza is a word that comes from Italian, so it's the same in both English, Spanish, and Italian. Portuguese, pretty much any language, it's going to be the same. So the pizza is hot. Now, this one might be a little bit difficult, but let's try to think. So, is the pizza being hot, is that a condition it's in at the moment? Or is that a permanent description? So let's think. Is the pizza going to fluctuate between being hot and not? It is, right? It's hot right now, but it might not always be hot. Because of that, in this case, we're talking about hot as being a condition. And that makes it temporary, which is going to be using the word estar. Now referring to pizza, got ella, right, or the it form, so it's going to be está. La pizza está caliente. Next one. It is 3 in the afternoon. It's 3 in the afternoon. So, if you remember, even though time seems like it's always changing, right? Basically, in Spanish, they think of time as something that's everlasting, doesn't fluctuate. And so, because of that, we're going to be using ser. It's kind of misleading, but ser is always going to be for anything that we're talking about for time. So, in this case, I'm using the word ser. Now, real quick, this can be very misleading, but if you watch my video on telling time, you might not know that it's not going to be es las tres de la tarde. That sounds weird. Even though in English we say it is, technically they're in reference to the hours, right? Las horas. Because of that, we're going to say son las tres de la tarde, because there's multiple hours that we're referring to. It's almost like saying they are 3 in the afternoon. Which is funny, that sounds weird to our English brains, but to me it almost makes a little bit more sense. We're talking about a plural amount of hours, so we should use the plural form of to be, right? And so it's very interesting, but in Spanish it's actually going to be son las tres de la tarde, where in English we say it is, so it can be a little confusing, but in this case use son, not es. Next one, las arepas, blank, de Colombia or Venezuela. The arepas is basically like a dish. It's almost like a pancake sort of thing. They're really good. When I lived in Colombia, I used to eat them all the time. But there's a big debate on whether they are from Colombia or from Venezuela. I swear, this is like a raging debate. They all hate each other. They all fight each other over whether they're from Colombia or from Venezuela. So in this case, if we're saying where they're from, that's the origin of it, right? Because of that, that's going to be ser. So las arepas son de Colombia o Venezuela. Referring to ellas, referring to multiple of them, right? It's going to have to be the multiple, the plural form, ellos, ellos, ustedes form. So las arepas son de Colombia o Venezuela. Wherever their origin is, it's never going to change. It's not something that constantly changes, right? Next one, el presidente, blank, en la reunión. The president is in in this case we'll translate it as meeting. And so if we're talking about where he is, that's something that's subject to change throughout the day, right? Something that changes all the time, where he is. So we're going to be using the temporary form, estar, for referring to him, está. El presidente está en la reunión. Next one, mi casa, blank, en la ciudad. Mi casa, my house, is in the ciudad, means city. Now it's very interesting because a lot of things that end in DAD are going to be TY in English. So it's funny, we don't say CUT in English, but we say city. It's pretty close. But then we see other ones like realidad, reality, stuff like that. But, so in this case, ciudad, going to translate to city. My house is in the city. Now we're talking about the location of something. Is it the location of an event? No. So remember, locations, where anything is currently located, going to be estar. So, está en la ciudad, referring to mi casa, ella, going to be ella, usted form. So, mi casa está en la ciudad. Next one, la puerta, blank, cerrada. It's going to be the door. It's interesting. Originally, it was porta, which it also is in Portuguese. I speak Portuguese as well, so it's porta in Portuguese. And that was kind of the original word for it, but then over time, Spanish just had some weird evolutions in the way that they said certain words, in which O's got thrown to UEs, some E's got thrown to IEs, stuff like that. But you can think a puerta is like a port of something, right? It's the entryway to something. Because of that, that's kind of where the word comes from. So if you need a way to remember the word door in Spanish, just think of that. La puerta is in cerrada, comes from the word cerrar, which means to close. It's the adjective, so closed. The door is closed. Let's think about this real quick. Is the door being opened and closed, is that a permanent description of how we're talking about the door? Well, if I was to say la puerta es cerrada, that would kind of mean like almost like the door is sealed off. It's permanently closed. But when we're talking about, just in general, if we're talking about doors, typically we would have to say está. If we're talking about them being open or closed, should be saying está because we're talking about the condition it's in. La puerta está cerrada. So typically when we talk about anything being opened or closed, pretty much always going to be estar. Next one. You are very, I'd say friendly. You are very friendly. Is you being friendly, is that something that changes a lot? No, right? People, when they're friendly, they just tend to be friendly forever. Or it's not something that is constantly fluctuating between them being friendly, between them being mean. No. Usually, if we're talking about a description about somebody like this, it's going to be ser. Now, it's in the tu form. And this tends to be like the hardest for students to remember. I remember this one was really hard for me to remember as well. But it's going to be eres. Tu eres muy amable. Next one, ellos, they are estudiando. Comes from the word estudiar. When we say ando, it means basically ing. So they are studying. Estudiar means to study. Estudiando, studying. For the exam. In this case, if we're talking about something they're doing at the moment, that's an action, right? But it's not something that they'll be doing for forever. It's something that's constantly changing, right? The action that somebody's doing. So in this case, we're going to say, están estudiando. We're saying, ellos están estudiando para el examen. And finally, el concierto. The concert is in, if we say Parque Central, the central park, or the main park. So the concert is in, I would say, the central park. Best way to translate it. In this case, if you remember, once again, can be a little misleading, but if we're talking about the location of events, remember that's going to be ser. And so if we're talking about el concierto, es en el Parque Central. The concert is in the Central Park. So that's basically the Sarah versus ESTAR guided practice right there. Hopefully everything made sense. Throw any comments down below if anything needs extra explanation. Try to respond to those. But overall, you can see that Sarah versus ESTAR, it's basically just going to be deciding between whether things are permanent or whether things are temporary. And so in a lot of these situations, it really only makes sense to use one because we're talking about something that's either permanent or something that's either temporary, right? Overall, Sarah versus ESTAR guided practice. Thanks for joining. See you in the next one.